You don't need to wait for a breakthrough. When I was 21 years old, I was 60 pounds heavier. I was thousands of dollars in debt. I had a negative mindset, a negative attitude. And I had a mentor come into my life who introduced me to the world of personal development. But really, he introduced me to the world of human excellence. And he helped me create a breakthrough in my life during that chapter. And there's been many breakthroughs since. But if I had known what I didn't know, right, which was personal development, human excellence, what you're watching and listening to on this show, then I would have understood at that time that I could create a breakthrough in my life at any point that I wanted to take my life, my relationships, my business, and my career to that next level. And while you may not be able to control the weather outside, you can't control what happens in the political landscape, you can't control 99% of what happens around you, you can control what you do in order to improve yourself when it comes to human excellence. And today we're talking all about breakthroughs and human excellence with my new friend, Mr. Gary Day Rodriguez. But before we talk to Gary, before I introduce you to him, all that we ask is you share this show with just one person who could use it the most. We're not going to show you an ad. We're not going to show you a sponsor. The Be Better broadcast has grown over the past year and a half because of your efforts, because you are the best part of the Be Better team. So when you take something away, or if we made you smile, laugh, a new insight, philosophy, share this show with just one other person. Thank you so much. Without further ado, let's talk to our guest today, Mr. Gary Day Rodriguez, all the way from Arkansas. And for those who don't know Gary, he has coached over 11,700 people worldwide. He's recognized as an international expert in the science of human excellence, and he is a published author on leadership and conscious capitalism through Bloomsbury Publishing. He has designed effective models of psychology-based systems for leadership success, human behavior, communication, and team dynamics into an eloquent system that we're going to dive into today that will help you transform and create the life of your dreams. So, Gary, thank you so much for being on the show, sir. It's great to have you here.
It's such an honor to be here, Brandon. So I really appreciate you having me on as a guest.
It's my pleasure. I know that you're working on a lot of cool things right now that we're going to dive into. I want to talk about your system for human excellence. But before we get there, I want to ask you, how did you find yourself in this world of improvement, this world of excellence, and really helping others do the same?
That is a great question, and it bears a focused answer. So I'll do my very best. So I grew up in a like most, I won't say most, but a lot of people grew up in highly dysfunctional families. There was drugs, there was alcohol, there was sexual abuse, there was all the things that kind of could manifest that would make a child hit the wall and die. And so I almost did that. I became in the early, of course, it was the 60s then. So I was all into that particular culture, got involved in the drug culture, almost didn't make it out of that alive. But I think what it was, I was trying to actually numb myself from the unresolved things of the past. Then as I had a breakthrough, and I had a series of different breakthroughs that occurred for me. One was just waking up to the fact that I was wasting time. I was wasting the time that was so precious to live. And once I got that realization, I got clean and sober in 12 hours. And never, I think I've had like almost probably 56 years of sobriety.
So you were in your early 20s when you came to this realization?
No, I was in my late teens when I came to this realization.
Got it.
So it became a driving force to not waste time, because our breaths are extraordinarily precious. As I kind of matured, I got married, I got into meditational practices. I was faced with this one thing that affected a great deal of people on the planet, and that's the AIDS crisis. So I launched into the AIDS crisis because no one else was. I ran the first AIDS educational seminar in Southern California in San Diego, pulled down politicians from Sacramento, immunologists from all the major hospitals and the holistic community. And we launched a whole process on educating people on what we thought AIDS was, because at that point in time, no one knew.
Yeah.
That blossomed into me contributing to this process called the HEART program, holistic AIDS response program. And that heart program was really the birthplace of where I got started. And that start was about trying to find accelerated change techniques that would get people to resolution with their life, because they only had 3 months to live. You were diagnosed and you were a skeleton in 3 months in those days. There was no cures and no drugs to help people with AIDS. So I spent a great deal of my time researching and trying to find out, how do you create change fast? Like the Freudian Jungian models just weren't cutting it. And so I launched into neurolinguistic programming. I got introduced to that.
Yeah.
I became a master practitioner of that, then eventually a master trainer of that. That evolved into a process called HNLP, which is humanistic neurolinguistic psychology. And it was very much about working at Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. The highest human need, eventually, as according to Gregory Bateson and Abraham Maslow, was spirituality. And that's not religion. That's like where you place yourself in the higher context of the world. Like, how do you see yourself as a part and parcel of a larger system? So there was a series of trainers that came together, NLP trainers, that came together and said, we're finding in the trenches with our clients that if we work up here at this higher logical level, we get much deeper pervasive change down below. And it's the same with organizations. If you have a value-driven organization that has a social impact outreach out into the communities, you have a much stronger brand distinction. You have much stronger leaders when they're value-driven and they have more humanity operating within their life. The book that our company published, which was Humanistic Business, Profit Through People with Power and Purpose, what that whole book was about was sort of dissecting the strategies of conscious capitalism and putting it into a systems so that organizations could figure out, like, if we put more heart and humanity into our systems and operations, our brand, and how we are actually involving our employees, we actually make a much higher profit. And so I don't believe personally the government's ever going to do it. I don't think religious organizations are ever going to do it. But I think consciously run organizations collectively can have a massive social impact. So a lot of what my passion has been is, how do you begin to start helping people wake up to the fullest potential that they actually are? We have the same level of neurological connections in our bodies as anyone else does. I mean, there's more neurological connections here than there are grains of sand on all the beaches of the planet.
Wow.
And we're using about 10% of them. So when you think of it that way, why do some people succeed and why do some people not? And it really does land on what the mindset is. Because I know for a fact that when I was a kid, I was so traumatized, I couldn't speak because I was a ceaseless stutterer. I saw that line at one point in my young, I was a late teen at that point, but I saw that line where I knew that if I crossed over that line, I would be homeless in rags under a bridge. I saw that point where I felt like I could give up mentally and emotionally and just allow myself to just kind of descend down into mental illness.
Yeah.
And I didn't allow it. But when I saw the line, it scared the holy bejesus out of me.
Yeah.
And I thought, if I don't wake up, if I don't stop wasting time, then my life's going to not be a realized life. I'm going to waste it. And I knew in the depths of me that there was something that I was here to do that I hadn't awakened to yet, like a purpose that I and only I could do, just like all of us.
Yeah.
You have a purpose. Every single person listening to this podcast, we have something here that we require to do that only we can do. I kind of have this metaphor that humanity is like a tapestry, and we individually are a thread in that tapestry. And if we don't wake ourselves up and we don't actualize ourselves, then that tapestry of humanity becomes incomplete. we have to shine brighter, especially at this point in time in human history. We have to shine brighter. We have to get out there and do the contribution that our souls and our hearts is here to do. And we have to be value driven and purposeful. And
Yeah, and I want to dive into that with you, but I want to ask you too, when you were in your late teens, that's a very young age, especially back then, not to age you, but especially back then before personal development was a thing where you could go on your Instagram feed and see motivational messages all day. That I'm assuming that didn't exist back then. So you mentioned afterwards that you saw that line of where your life was headed and it scared you and you said, I don't want to go that direction. Did you have people in your life who helped you, or how did you make those first steps in your late teens to become sober, to move past that, to discover your purpose? Like, where did you begin when it came to working on yourself back in the early days?
That's a great question. Now I'm super going to date myself. I mean, it's going to be ridiculous and I'll be embarrassed, but I'm really proud of the fact that I've been able to trot along this path of life successfully for so many years. But it was back in the first, I won't say the first days, but the mature days of the Beatles, when they came out with Abbey Road and Sgt. Pepper's, Hearts Club Band. That album, when they were following Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who introduced transcendental meditation to the world. And the Beatles were one of the, I think, the biggest brand assets that that transcendental meditation had ever had. So I became very fascinated with the meditational practices, and I wanted to understand how I could still my mind. I didn't feel like that was the path for me, but I eventually, at a very young age, because when I got clean and sober, all my trauma rose and I went agoraphobic, like I couldn't leave my home for a year. And I had food delivered to my house. I'd leave my house only around 3:00 in the morning with my dog and walk the beaches in Mission Beach. And that was the only time I left my house. So there was definitely issues that were unresolved, that were quite powerful for me to overcome. And I heard about this path called the Path of the Masters, and I felt very, very attracted to it. And I began to read more about it. I eventually went to some meetings, and I eventually got initiated into that particular meditational practice. And it's a meditational practice that I follow to this day. So it's been a long time, since I was about 17 till now, that I've been following this. And I get up every morning, I meditate under that discipline, and it gives me a center, a core to align to. And this is one of the things I think is really important, because when people make changes, I'll again go back to Abraham Maslow's and Gregory Bateson's work on logical levels. When you go up to a place where you feel like you can connect to something higher than you, it aligns you. It gives you a purpose. So whatever your faiths are, it really doesn't matter. I mean, I love what the Dalai Lama said when someone said, "What is your religion?" And he said, "My religion is kindness." And when I was in India, I had the great good fortune to go and study there. And when I was in India, someone asked the master of that particular yogic practice, "Why are there so many religions?" And he said, "Really, there's only one. There is only one thing that's ever asked of you. How much love and devotion did you have for the Creator? And how did you demonstrate that in creation?" That is the only faith. That is the only religion. There's different paths to demonstrate that. But the true test is, and the true premise of having a spiritually led life is that. So I look at all the faiths and all the different discourse between the faiths, and I'm like, just grow your love and demonstrate that in every relationship you possibly can, especially as a leader in a business. You have the potential to impact literally hundreds to thousands of people's lives, not only your employee, but their families. And so how you show up, because literally the employee models the leader, your philosophy, your heart, how you think, how you engage with others, the civility, the respect in which you run your position, your employees will model that. So it becomes this beautiful external example of the leader's relationship to themselves. How congruent the leader is will be how functional the business becomes.
Yeah, that's so true. I want to dive into a couple things there. So, transcendental meditation. I've had a couple people on the show who've talked about this, and I've met some people in my own life. And I've gone to a course for transcendental meditation. I paid the investment. I learned it. I've got my mantra, right? And I did it for a bit, and I definitely found benefit in it. The part where I got snagged up is the whole meditating twice per day, because I would do it once in the morning, but then later in the day, I'm go go go. I'm to all these different places, and I couldn't really find a great time to incorporate the second meditation. So, kind of a twofold question here, just curiosity. And
Sure.
for those who don't know what transcendental meditation is, I implore you to go check it out, look it up, see what it entails. But I guess the first question is, what's the biggest benefit that you find from this, to the extent that you've done it for all of this time, and how do you use it in your life? Meaning, like, what does your day look like when it comes to TM? Are you doing it in the morning and the afternoon? How often? You mentioned the morning, so kind of a twofold question there.
Yeah, and let me clarify. I do not practice TM. I practice a yogic practice called Short Shabad Yoga.
Okay.
So, but it is a mantra-based yoga, but it's more of what they call a bhakti yoga, a yoga of devotion, and being able to go out into the world and make that kind of contribution. So, it's more of a process that when you sit in meditation, again, I'll reiterate, it aligns you to a higher purpose.
Yeah.
Because if you're aligned to a higher purpose and you're anchored to that, then your ability to be more congruent and consistent is not coming from what you're going to get from your congruency, like what's your payback and your secondary gain. It comes from who you are and how you see others and how you see the world. And when you see the world not as a divisive place, but more as when people wake up in different levels and different degrees, and all it is that people need the education to actualize themselves more. They need tools. And if they don't have the tools, they can't actually wake up and educate themselves. So I've been this educator now since I was 17, probably before that. And, working always, I've always run meetings. I've always run ceremonies. I've always done study groups since I was a kid. And when I was in high school, I was running these lunchtime concerts in the auditorium, because what I do is I charge like 50 cents to get in. We do light shows, and we'd have a live band, and I would collect the money, and then I would go and donate it to a variety of different institutions, specifically Native American reservations. So I'd take the money, I'd go out to the reservations, I'd hand it to the people that were in power. I'd say, this is, our contribution to the Native American community.
And why the Native Americans?
That's really a good question too. I have had this deep love for the indigenous people. I think the indigenous people had a certain level of wisdom that we've lost. I've studied with the Aboriginal lawkeeper from all the tribes of Western Australia. She was the authority and is the authority. I've worked with shamans in Peru in the Sacred Valley. I've worked with kahunas on the Big Island of Hawaii. I've been sweat lodge keeper for an Arikara Hadushka medicine woman for 10 years. And I've studied and trained in India for over 60 years.
Wow.
So what I want to just say, well, no, not that long, 56 years. So what I'll say is that there is a golden thread that runs through not only Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Hinduism, but even through the indigenous races, there is this golden thread that runs through it all. And if we're all looking at how we're going to unify ourselves, because if we look at the disruption that's happening in our world right now, a lot has to do with people. People do not see sameness, they see differences.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, there's a certain level of unity that just being human gives us. And there's a golden thread that binds us all. And whatever you focus on, and I know you know this, Brandon, but whatever you focus on, you make stronger. You make stronger. Why? Because your thoughts and your emotions are literally building neurosynaptic connections that form superhighways through your nervous system. Your thoughts are electrical charges that flow down the pathway of the densest neurological pathway that you form through repetition and through habit. So, all this means is that we are constructing ourselves daily by our repetition of the thoughts we think, and the emotions that ensue as a consequence of the thoughts that we think.
Yeah.
We're in control of our minds and what we focus on, therefore, what we build into our identity. You know, Buddha really said it best from the Dhammapada. He said, let me see if I can quote this. The thought manifests as the word manifests as the deed.
Mhm.
The deed turns into habit. The habit hardens into character. So watch your words and your thoughts with care and let it spring for concern for all living things. For as
Wow.
the shadow follows the body, as we think and speak, so we become.
That's an
And, it,
incredible quote.
and encased in that quote is literally the owner's manual for how you evolve.
The owner's manual.
It is that quote itself opens up the door for the owner's manual for your mind. Because think about it this way. Your thoughts are based upon your classical conditioning. Like, how did you become you, Brandon? If you looked at that, you grew in the neurochemicals of your mother's womb. Your thought, not your thoughts, but your body, your bones, your organs, your flesh were all formed in the neurochemicals of your mother's womb. Every emotion she had, every thought she had, every engagement she had with your father during your gestation, your body grew in the vibration and the emotional resonance of everything she felt and thought.
Wow.
Now, do you think that would have an impact on you?
Yes.
Of course it would. So we birth out into the world. We have more neurological connections firing off at between birth and 7 than any other time in our life. And we are these quantum sensing devices, and we're meaning-making creatures. So how we do this is we have a key significant event, and the first one is your birth experience. And then we create constellations of beliefs around those events because we're always trying to make meaning so that we can survive the stimulus of the world. When that all occurs, we start building up a construct of beliefs. And that becomes one of the densest filters that we see our reality through. So it all will come back to the key significant events and the beliefs that we constructed around that. Our beliefs become a hierarchy of importance. And the really important beliefs become our values.
Gotcha.
So what glues this all together is what would happen if your life was filled, and this is something that's kind of near and dear to me, because people will say, well, everyone's got the same opportunities. I'm like, no, they actually don't. If you grow up in a home that is riddled with a lack of love, criticism, violence, absenteeism, infighting between the parents, drug, alcohol use, all that. If you grow up in an environment like that, and especially if you're growing up in an environment where there's poverty, it actually affects the neuro actions in your brain and in your body. Not to mention that core significant events create trauma in those environments. Your nervous system is so sensitive that trauma at those points in time creates an indelible effect on your nervous system. Then we have the whole process of the neurochemical dump of cortisol and adrenaline from the amygdala gland and other organs in your body, and that sets us into fight or flight. So people that have lived through their lives with a lot of trauma that remain emotionally unresolved, they go, I'm going to like do personal development and I'm going to heal myself and I'm going to be like on top of my world. But they're carrying around a luggage of trauma behind them.
Wow.
And when triggers happen out here, the cortisol dump happens automatically, instantly. And when you get triggered, the cortisol dump shuts down the frontal lobes, because that's what happens when you go into fight or flight. Shuts down the frontal lobes, which is your reasoning. And then you're reactive rather than proactive. Now, this is one of the biggest issues in leadership development.
Trauma.
Yeah, unresolved trauma. Because Peter Drucker said it best. He said that leadership is really about consistency and congruency. So leaders walk in with the very best intention, oftentimes into volatile environments where there's a lot of stress factors. And they may even have contentious people on their executive team that they can't get along with. And what will happen is that that leader will become triggered. Let's say they grew up with a violent, yelling father, and they suddenly have this dominant alpha male who's 2 or 3 steps below their position, who acts and triggers off that loud, aggressive, domineering, and unreasonable aspect of their father in their consciousness.
Yeah.
So what happens is the reptilian brain clicks on, dumps cortisol and adrenaline. No matter how much they try to contain it, the stress factors become so overwhelming inside of them because they haven't resolved that back there. And so this person acts as a trigger for them. And then what happens is, generally, because we put on the mask of our professionalism, we do passive aggressive behaviors to try to get rid of that guy.
Yes.
Minimize that guy.
Power maneuvers.
And then everybody sees that, oh my God, there's all these games going on. Oh my God, it's so toxic in here.
Yeah.
Because the leaders haven't done the deep enough work.
Wow.
So if we're going to look at how do you be better, you have to become very, very, very curious about what are the emotional states driving my unconscious behavior. Why do I act the way I act? Leaders have to become very curious about what it is that is driving them, because you're only using 10% of your mental capability. The other 90 is at the subconscious level.
So how do you spot that unconscious behavior then?
Oh, well, that's really smart. That's a smart question. I spent a lot of time thinking about this and developing processes for it. I'm currently writing a book on resolving trauma. And I developed a process, let's see, how long ago? I'm going to date myself again. Probably about 25, maybe 30 years ago.
Okay.
And this process was based on the work of Connie Ray Andreas, who was a masterful NLP trainer, ran NLP Comprehensive in Colorado. And she introduced this process called I Pattern Scramble, which is where I believe EMDR came from. And the I Pattern Scramble I was utilizing on stage once, and the subject had a very recent experience. I Pattern Scramble was great for the kind of long-term, long back into the past kind of memories, but not so great for the recent ones. This guy came up as a volunteer with a recent memory, and I didn't know that because I do it all content free. So in the process, I had to amalgamize other processes onto this one, and I bolted it all together on the fly on stage, and it worked.
Wow.
And I was like, holy mother of God.
Now, how do you know when it works? How do you know that that trauma has been
Yeah.
released?
This is a thing called sensory acuity. What you look for is when emotional states shift inside, it reflects in the physical body. So you can see the person's breath rate change, their heart rate change, the skin tone changes, the expression on the face, of course, changes. And so I'm doing the process after I amalgamized everything, and I watch this guy go from veins out like this, sweating, to completely calm.
Wow.
And this is the best part of it. This takes no more than 12 to 20 minutes.
Wow.
So I watched this guy like completely shift, and then I stopped the process and I said, I want you to go back to that memory and bring that memory back and just tell me what it looks like and what it feels like. He says, it looks like a black and white photo in a photo album. And it's like two-dimensional, like I know what happened, but I don't have an emotional charge to it right now. And I said, you never will again.
Mm.
This process permanently reorganizes where and how that memory is logged into your nervous system. And I could go into a very long, detailed explanation of how it happens and the science behind it. But it's a process that the reason I'm doing my book right now is because there's so much trauma in the world. When you think about kids going to school and putting metal plates in their backpacks because if a school shooter comes in, they'll have something to protect their vital organs. I'm working with teenagers right now that's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, the trauma that people are going through, every parent on the planet needs to know this process so they can help their child with trauma. Every coach needs to use it. Every psychologist needs to use it because it is so fast and permanent change. And I've been kind of in the closet about it. And I'm finally like, I've got to like just buckle down and do it.
Yeah.
And write the book and get it out there. So I'm doing that now.
Now I got to ask, until your book comes out, which is when, by the way, do you have a timeline on when that book might be released?
I'm telling you what, I'll explain what I'm going to do with it. I got approached by a promoter who heard about the work that I do. And she called me and said, could we have a meeting? I said, sure. And what she does is she puts certifications up online, gets it translated into about 5 or 6 different languages. And what I want to do is write the book as a precursor to the certification that I'm going to put up online, get it translated into multiple languages so people around the world can have it. And it'll be a certification that will be online, and then we'll do live events.
Cool.
And I'll be doing webinars as well and doing demos for people to go over the process live on Zoom and then live in audiences. Because what I deeply desire to do is show how you begin to start resolving trauma in yourself and then helping others. Because this is literally the birthplace. What makes your past seem so real is the unresolved emotions that get triggered off. You get the cortisol and adrenaline dump, and then you're in fight or flight and you're in fear.
Yeah.
And this is what stops. We can overlay all kinds of great processes to focus on the future and do your goals and change your language and do all those great things that need to be done as well.
Yes.
But where people get really discouraged with personal development is they don't understand why they can't retain it.
Yeah.
Why they get thrown off, why certain things happen in their life and they're like, I just am nosediving right now and I don't get it. Let me write out my goals again. Let me focus on my goals. That's not going to do it.
Now, let me ask you this though, Gary, because for the leader listening right now who says, well, Gary, it's clear that I'm sure I have some trauma in my past that is triggering in my present and will likely continue to trigger unless I pinpoint this and release it using your frameworks. Once they identify, okay, this event in my past was traumatic for me and I believe it's still living with me today. Is there something that you can give us now that will help somebody to alleviate that trauma or release that trauma?
This would probably have to be a longer podcast show for me.
Like, what do you do once you pinpoint what that event was?
See, if I go in and explaining what the process is, which I'm happy to do, But it works with 3 different techniques. Okay. So the accumulation of it is the eye pattern scramble. So one of the things, there's 6 points to the eye pattern chart in NLP. 2 points lateral with the eyes, 2 points above the eyes, 2 points below the eyes. When people are looking up, they're searching for visual images.
Yeah.
When they look laterally, they're searching for sounds. When they look down, they're searching for feelings. This is why when you talk to someone and you ask them a question, their eyes will do something like this. They'll go.
They're recalling information or constructing an image or
Exactly.
going within. Yes.
The eyes grow out of cerebral cortex as embryos, deeply connected to the central nervous system. So when the eyes are moving, they're activating the central nervous system. Get a memory right now for me, Brandon, like a happy memory.
Okay.
Notice where your eyes went.
Yes. Yes. I was seeing a picture. Yes.
That's exactly right. And so your memory, the only way you know you're you is by the pictures, sounds, and feelings that constitute the representation of that memory. When your eyes move, it's like a combination to a safe. It brings that memory back in its full representation. Now, these are all survival techniques that we're biologically meant to do. Because if we can recall danger from the past and bring it forward, then we know either to fight or flight, and we have some sort of strategy to help us cope. That's how we learn and survive in the world.
Yeah.
So when the eyes are moved, that's what they're doing. They're sorting for the information. Now, all of the events that enter your nervous system, including the traumatic ones, have an eye pattern strategy, a sequence that unlocks them in its full representation.
Wow.
So if you want to begin to make one tiny movement with it, you want to be able to get a slight feeling of whatever that trauma was and move your eyes in completely random directions to the 6 points of the eye pattern chart.
Wow.
Now, there's other techniques that are really important as well, and I'll just share that. The other techniques are you sit down with a pen and paper and you write out all the best things that's ever happened to you. Like, I'll give you an example. You don't have to even write them down. All you have to do is recall them. So times that you were loved, times that you felt loved, times that you gave love, times that you did things you didn't think you could do, but you did them, times you almost fell down laughing, times you were inspired by nature, times that you felt close to whatever you consider God to be for you. And you recall 3 to 4 of those times for each one of those questions until you kind of get this little bump of energy, right? Because if you're thinking about all the great things and you're running those internal representations, you're going to bump up your energy.
Yeah.
Right? And then you ask yourself, if all these great things in my life could be represented by a color, what color would they be? If they could be represented by a symbol, what symbol would they be? If they could be represented by a sound, what sound would they be? And if they could be represented by a smell, what smell would they be?
Are you anchoring those great experiences?
Yeah. Now notice I'm kind of duplicating the 5 senses, right?
Yeah.
So then there's 2 parts. You scramble up the combination that traumatic event entered your nervous system. Einstein said imagination is more important than intellect. So the subconscious mind, 90% of you, infinite power within you that no one can calculate its power, takes vivid sensory specific imagination as reality. That's why you can go to a movie, watch bad actors with bad scripts and horrible sets, and go home and check under your bed because you want to make sure Jason's not there, right? You're in total imagination, but your nervous system goes, wow, that's real, right?
Yeah.
So what we want to be able to do is we want to reimagine the internal representation of that traumatic event. Wow. So we're scrambling up our eyes, we're scrambling up how that event entered our nervous system, and then you use the power of your imagination and flood it with the color. You bolt on in your imagination, bolt on billions of symbols of whatever symbolize the best things, permanently affixed, can't be removed. And you do this over and over again.
Yeah.
And then you hear the sounds that would represent the best experiences of your life.
Mm.
And then you breathe in the smell of the best experiences of your life. So you have to focus. Being facilitated is much more preferable, but you asked, so I'm delivering for you.
You are, and I appreciate it because you're going deep, and I love that.
But when you're able to use your mind, the discipline of your mind to reimagine the event in the colors, bolted on symbols, the sounds of the best things that's ever happened to you, and breathe in the smell of the best things that represent all the good things that's happened to you. And you overlay it over that internal representation of the trauma. You positively contaminate and collapse the visual anchor or the visual representation. You flood it with the best things that's ever happened to you, and you reimagine it and reimagine it and reimagine it, simultaneously still moving your eyes.
Wow.
When you do that, you can actually begin to make tremendous progress in lessening the impact of really terrible things that's happened to you.
And you do this with this gentleman sitting across from you, and you see his body change. You see this trauma release from him. And after that moment, it doesn't mean the same thing when he looks back on that, image that's now black and white.
It doesn't have the same emotional impact and won't ever again.
Wow. It's powerful stuff. I'm excited to read your book, and I'm excited to have you back on once the book is out to really dive more into these principles, because I understand that it's a lot to talk about in a conversation like this. The podcast will go on forever, but I appreciate you going deep into those details, and other people are commenting right now with the same thing. So thank you for that.
No, you're very welcome. I'm so committed to this because I know, for all of us, we have to define our purpose. We have to find our groove. And finding it for me was this, because as we begin to do this, it becomes incredibly important. And let me answer that question for Scott. No, this is not EMDR. In fact, I-pattern scramble was created way before EMDR ever was. And so I assume and I suspect that EMDR was birthed from the I-pattern scramble, because it became a pretty standard NLP process taught in a variety of different different trainings that were done around the country.
Wow.
For best helping. And Scott, I have worked a lot and volunteered a lot with working with veterans. I used to work with a group when I was living in Dallas called Farmers Assisting Returning Military. And they are an incredible group of veterans who have committed a huge part of their life to helping other veterans. And so I would go down there and teach classes. They would call me when they would have a veteran that was particularly at risk, especially someone new coming in that was either suicide prone or drugs and alcohol. And I'd go in there and do the trauma work around their war trauma.
Let me ask you this question, because this goes along with what we're talking about with breakthroughs and purpose and spirituality. You've helped a lot of different types of people. Okay. You've worked with the indigenous peoples. You've helped out during the AIDS epidemic. You are helping veterans. Like, how do you know where to go next? How do you know who to help next? What guides your actions in living out your purpose on a daily basis?
I have this prayer that I do for myself. And part of it is that I know that when I do something that serves humanity, that is the best act of devotion to God that I can give. Because we're all sparks of the divine in my worldview. And as I'm able to help another, I'm actually helping people wake up to another level of wherever and however they decide to awaken themselves and make their contribution. So I have this vision for myself that when I pass, I want to look back on the planet and see millions of lights lit from something I've done. So I train coaches, I train psychologists, I train social workers how to work with these processes, because there's a multitude of processes to help people improve themselves. I'm not saying that this is the only process. There's hundreds of processes, but in my mind, what I've done with my career is I've trained. I'm still learning stuff. I still do other certifications because I want to add on to constantly. Our lives as leaders have to be an act of kaizen, an act of constant improvement. And so I'm constantly learning. And that I want to amalgamize in what I already know, create something new, and give it forward if I find it to be effective. I can't think of any other greater purpose than to help wake up someone else. I mean, I've had a lot of money in my day. I've had lots of shiny objects and big houses and fancy cars and all of that. And quite frankly, it bores the holy heck out of me. It does. There's no satisfaction. It's like licking a stone, expecting nectar to emerge. Nothing ever gets, you don't get any fulfillment from that. You get a bump in your personal significance, but that's a nosedive eventually. So what we want to do is look at what is going to give us this great sense of fulfillment, of peace, of love. What's going to do that? And it's always, what do I have to give to another?
Wow.
Because when you do that, you give back to what the creator, whatever this creator is and however you define it, you give back to that source.
On that same vein, because I could talk to you about this forever, and thank you for that explanation, because I think that that's one of the most powerful descriptions of purpose that we've had on the show. If you had to give one ingredient or next step to someone who is looking to create a personal breakthrough in their life today, they're listening, they might feel stuck, they might be unsure of what the next best step is, what would that next step or ingredient be that you give them?
I have so many thoughts running through my head like a Gatling gun right now, but I want to give like the most simplistic one, which is treat others like you would want to be treated. Act with kindness, knowing that people literally do the best they know how to do with the resources they have available. Stop judging and condemning others, because as you attack out, you fear attack back, and it completely wrecks your peace. Never speak ill of another. Do your best to know that people are operating from that core wound that they haven't healed yet. Give them grace, because in your relationships, you either condemn yourself or you free yourself, because all condemnation is self-condemnation, because your subconscious mind takes every word you speak literally about yourself. So when you're talking ill about someone else, your subconscious mind is taking it literally about you. That's why all condemnation is self-condemnation.
Wow.
And the more you condemn, the more you fear condemnation. So the more fear you live in. It's an endless loop that people get stuck in. And it all is so simplistic. Treat people like you would want to be treated. Stop condemning, stop judging. Reach across the aisle and take someone else's hand. They're the same flesh and blood as you, with the same wounds that you carry, the same brokenheartedness, the same longing to be loved, seen, heard, appreciated, and validated. Do that, and you'll receive it back tenfold.
That's powerful.
It's the truth.
We've got a really great comment too from that, which is, for me, a life without purpose and fulfillment and a life of not being of service is not a great life. It's one I've been living the past few years. I miss the person I have been. Thanks for this podcast. It gives me a little hope. Wow. Thank you for that comment. For that line right there of, it's one I've been living the past few years. I miss the person I have been. For someone who misses a past version of themselves, would you have any advice for that individual?
I think we all came in with a certain level of innocence, a certain level of purity. I know when I used to walk to school as a little boy, I would literally, I was probably the original tree hugger. I'm serious. I would hug trees on my way to elementary school. I would always be late because I'd be like, oh God, I love this tree. I walk a little bit. Oh, there's another one. I really love that tree. I have no idea why. That's just what I did. I was a kid who would stop people from pouring salt on snails, you know. But what I know is that you came in innocent, you came in beautiful, you came in love. You came here to experience that. And I have to give this one little metaphor, and I hope you stop me if I'm going too far over. But human beings are like a glass of milk, whole, not homogenized. And the traumas of our past and our judgment and what we enact unconsciously every day, because this is how the whole culture is, you know, judge, condemn, separate, judge, condemn, separate. But when we stop that, it's almost like our minds is this child stirring the milk constantly, but there's cream inherent in the milk. So when you stop the condemnation, you stop the fear. When you do the deeper work, you quiet your mind. When you focus on a higher purpose and on being an expression of something bigger than you, you quiet the mind. Your peace starts to return. And eventually, the stir comes out of the milk and the cream naturally rises to the surface. Mm. Our love, our spirituality, our connection to all things is the cream that each one of us inherently is. But we are constantly being wrangled by our past, by the disappointments that have occurred to us from birth on. And it becomes this really powerful place that we can start to wake up. Just remember the spirit that you are and start demonstrating more of that in every act you do, every conversation you have, and in all of your relationships. And, you know, I'll invite the listeners, you know, I have an online course where I speak in-depthly about many of these things with lots of tools to actually help, especially your intimate relationships and your work relationships as well. It's called Gary'sCourse.com. It's up on Teachable. It's a whole series of short videos with a work manual that goes along with it. It's some of the best work that I've done, and it's really powerful. And I'm more than happy for the listenership of your podcast to give a sizable discount coupon for that. We have to build it first. I got my tech guy kind of working on that. And we can offer that to everyone. So, you know, you can get this information, you can refresh the information and learn more, because there's so much to learn. Our life is so precious. When I was in India, this will be the last thing I say, I promise.
You're doing well. Yep, you're good.
When I was in India, the master said to me, he said, every breath is worth all the treasures of this world. So you gather all the treasures and wealth into one place and call it yours. Couldn't buy you one breath. He said, you take, because we're a speck of dust floating in an infinite ocean of specks of dust. You take all the wealth from every single physical place in the creation, and you put it in one place and you call it yours. Will not buy you one breath. Do not waste time.
This has been an insightful conversation, Gary. And I thank you for going to all the different angles of it and diving deep into many different aspects. And for everyone listening, I asked Gary to talk about his course, Creating Incredible Relationships. And there's links in the description. The reason I asked him to talk about this course specifically is because it really goes deep into exactly what we're talking about here, deepening the relationship with yourself so that you can develop greater relationships with the people that you care about, that you love, that you work with on a daily basis as a leader or as a leader without the title. This course will help you. And Gary was kind enough to create that discount code for us that will be in the description. So be sure to go check it out. For those listening, it's at garyscourse.com, garyscourse.com. And keep an eye out for everything that Gary's working on because links to his social medias will be below. And Gary, again, thank you so much for this conversation. We've got comments that are saying the same thing. And it was a pleasure to meet you today and having you on the show, sir. So thank you very much.
It was so awesome for me, my friend. And I thank you so much. It was such a joy to be here. And thanks for all the people that listened and gave comments and hopefully got value.
I'm sure they did. Thank you very much, sir.
God bless you, brother.
God bless you. What a conversation, guys, on creating personal breakthroughs, but not just that, but on being aware of and recognizing that trauma is being triggered around most of us on a daily basis that we might not even be aware of. We might not even notice it. And Gary went deep into detail on how we can begin to notice that trauma and how we can work on it. But again, he's got a book coming out in the near future that will go deeper into that. We'll definitely have Gary back on for that. But he talked about spirituality as the highest order, right? If we start there, then it trickles down to everything else. We talked about leadership. We talked about so many different virtues for living an incredible life. So I hope you took a ton out of this conversation. To go to the next step, it's going to garyscourse.com and taking his Creating Incredible Relationships course right on Teachable. You get the workbook, you get the video series. It'll help deepen your learnings from what we talked about today, and it will help to continue that relationship with Gary as well. If you took anything out of this conversation, please share this show with just one other person who could use this message as well. I'm sharing the show with many people, and this has been one of the greatest conversations we've had on the broadcast in a long time, and all the conversations are great. So I hope you took something of value away today. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and until we talk again next time, continue to be better.